you write at the beginning of your book with Iraq and Afghanistan and kind of these forever wars, we've stopped paying attention for the most part as a country. And I think you're right on here with this too. I mean, the 20th anniversary of Iraq just passed, and it really there wasn't so much made about it.
Mm-hmm.
But talk a little bit about why you think we've stopped paying attention to some
Yeah,
of these
and
more recent
we're
wars.
gearing up for different type of war. The military is going through a sort of doctrinal shift and acquisitions shift to prepare for peer-to-peer conflict, right? Back to what the military feels more comfortable doing, preparing for fighting, Russia or China or what have you. And but even during the wars, there was that sort of lack of attention. I remember talking with a journalist in, oh God, this must have been 2016, 2017. And he said to me, I just caught myself talking about Afghanistan as if the war was over. And I was just there, right? He'd like done a reporting trip, like maybe like a couple months before. And so one of the things that the book talks about is this sort of shift in how we started waging the wars, right? Because they were very unpopular. But particularly, and I was writing a lot of this during the Obama presidency and right afterwards, there's, this hugely contentious troop surge in Iraq, right? Which people think of as successful, right? Certainly in the military. General John Allen once said to me, it's the closest we came to victory, right? That's how it's thought of. And then there's this idea that we're going to do what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there's this sort of fight between the military and the Obama administration in the early days of the Obama presidency over the troop surge that Obama is planning. And then these troops go to Afghanistan as part of a sort of limited troop surge that is just doomed, right? I remember in 2009 being with a unit that was, getting ready for deployment to Afghanistan. And I talked to this, Lance Corporal, like a young kid, you're talking like, I don't know, 19, 20, 21 years old, something like that. And, how are you going to be successful in Afghanistan? He tells me through cultural effectiveness, right? Which is obviously him just saying what he's been trained to say, because this is the idea, this is what we did in Iraq, this is what we're going to do in Afghanistan. And then that unit ends up going to Sangin, right, and just being in a tremendous amount of violence. And the cultural and political and ethnic and religious and economic forces that you're supposed to take into account and impact as a battalion commander, platoon commander, squad leader, all of those are just converging on murderous hostility to American troops. And a lot of those troops, even at the time, know as soon as we leave, this place is going right back to the Taliban, right? And so that style of attempting to win these wars is quickly going out of fashion. But there's this sort of disconnect in the American public where they don't like the wars. They understand that they're not going very well. They understand that repeatedly promises have just totally failed to materialize, right? The Iraq war was not over in 6 weeks, or certainly not 6 months or whatever it was Donald Rumsfeld said. The initial insurgency in 2004 was not the last, dying gasp of, dead enders of the regime. The surge in Afghanistan did not ultimately succeed. You have the rise of ISIS later. It's a complex story. The surge in Afghanistan was a failure, a violent and bloody failure, ultimately. But at the same time, Americans, there are reasons for this, really don't like ISIS taking over large swaths of Iraq. They are concerned about terrorism and all these other things. And so they want us killing the bad guys still. And what we start shifting to is an increase in use of drones, special operations forces, supervised train and assist forces who are working with local forces, giving them not just training support, but also air support. There's this highly sophisticated kind of kill capture program that gets developed. The stat that I use in the book is, in 2004, we're Joint Special Operations Command, which is, like the Navy SEALs, Ramies, the high speed commando type troops. They're doing about 12 raids a month. By 2006, mid 2006, they're doing about 300 a month, right? Which is not because the Navy SEALs went to the gym and got on the treadmill and lowered their runtime and got faster. It's because the whole way that we integrated intelligence and direct action units totally changed, right? And became a much, much tighter loop where we're fusing intelligence and operations in a way that is, as Gates, a former defense secretary, says, is unparalleled in modern warfare, right? And that style is something that we have applied to other places where the sort of intelligence targeting system is this incredibly lethal thing, and we're in Iraq and Afghanistan, special operations troops, American special operations troops are pulling the trigger at the end of that targeting system or dropping the bomb from a drone. There are places like Colombia where we're assisting them with the targeting apparatus, and then it's Colombian troops that are dropping the bomb or pulling the trigger at the end of the day. And so there's a whole variety of ways in which we have been able to have a lot of lethal effects with a limited troop presence, with a heavy reliance on technology, intelligence, special operations troops, and also drones, right? Which means that you have a lot less public exposure. You don't really have any embeds with special operations groups or with drones. You A lot of the stuff is sort of draped in often more secrecy than is necessary, and it's relatively low cost compared to the sorts of way that we were fighting when I was in Iraq, right? But it's also much more distanced from the reality of what we're doing on the ground. And so I'm sort of tracing that shift and my sort of moral and also just kind of practical military concerns with what this means long term for these regions, and for what we're doing as a country in these places. And one of the things that concerns me is it's this thing where you're able to continue doing violence with low political cost and low public exposure, which means little accountability. And it's very easy for things to sort of take on a kind of, we continue doing this by inertia rather than because it's a good idea or because it's part of a coherent, integrated plan for a region.